So welcome, everyone. So nice to see you here tonight. My subject tonight is of time and the timeless. I want to talk about time in a few different ways. Some of my talk will be about secular time. And then towards the end of the talk, I'm going to move into time in some new ways that we discover it in the practice. So time is a very big component of our reality. You know, it's like air. We can't see it, but it pervades our lives. We aren't really even sure what it is or if it exists, but we know it as an abstraction in our own mind, in the human mind. We share it. So we have it as just a mental concept, an abstraction with no concrete existence. But for an abstraction, it's very powerful. It remains one of the most important forces in our lives. So because time is so important in our lives, most spiritual disciplines seriously invite practitioners to investigate the subject of time. So that was motivating me and picking this subject tonight to investigate a little bit with you. Buddhism addresses the issues of time in a number of ways, and we'll look at some of these together tonight. My talk is entitled Time and the Timeless. So we're going to investigate, as I said, we'll start with our secular behavior around time, and then move towards the end of the talk into what I'm calling the timeless in our practice when we actually transcend time. But first, let's start with the secular. So many of you may know in April, I fell, I broke my hip, and I had a total hip replacement. And the reason that I fell, well, I prefer to blame it on the shoes I was wearing, these Crocs that slipped. And the truth is that the accident was caused, at least in part, because I was not being present. I was not being mindful. My life had become too busy, and I was struggling with having enough time to keep up with all the things that I had committed to. I was recently retired, and I made this big mistake, and if you retire, don't make this mistake. I over-volunteered. I advise you to volunteer for nothing for a little while, and then maybe one thing. But my intentions were good, so there's that. And Buddhism puts a lot of weight on our intentions, doesn't it? The karma is not that bad. But I wanted to help. I wanted to do good things. I wanted to help Mountain Stream. I wanted to help see my political leanings manifest. I wanted to help my local writing group and be active in writing. And I wanted to do charitable work through Buddhist organization around the world. But there was too much on my plate. And my mind was racing at that moment when I fell with all the things I had to do and how busy I was. I knew I needed to resign some of the jobs I had, but I didn't have the courage, really, is what it comes down to. It's hard to say no. And I knew I had to say no and disappoint some people. But at the moment that I fell, I got this clear message. You have to resign. And so I'm happy to report that I have resigned from a great many things, and that my life is greatly improved from how it was in April when I fell. One of the things I haven't resigned from is teaching, which is of all the things I do, maybe the one that is most important to me, that gives me back the most energy. But I'm very happy that I didn't hit my head when I fell, because if I had hit my head, it might have been that my time was up. So one of the things I'd like to do tonight is with you together, look at these phrases that we use frequently about time, like the one I just used, my time is up. We use these, the way we use these phrases is unconscious, they're just part of our language, but they shed a lot of light on how we unconsciously view time. My time is up. It's a good starting place. Each person sees their life as my time, the time that I own, my little sliver of history. And we're not even aware of that, but that we see it as my time. All the other things that are happening in the world, but this is my time on earth. So let's look at a lot of other phrases as I go through my talk. Our attitudes towards time, the reason that it's great to look at them is because they have to do with suffering. And the Buddha said, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. Much of our suffering for ourselves and others that we cause comes from how we relate to time. We have something, you might even call it time illness. It's this modern sickness that gives people heart attacks and other problems. We get so wound up and stressed because we have to be on time. So this is really important to look at and see if we can undo some of this straitjacket that time keeps us in. Look at the harm it does. As our practice matures, our relationship to time changes. Our relationship to reality itself changes, and the relationship to time is a big part of that. Time is a very great mystery. So we don't really know what it is, or if it even exists. And spiritual development is also a very great mystery. Mindfulness and how we feel when we're mindful is kind of a mystery. We don't really understand how time works or how spiritual development works. Pieces emerge, here I say over time, but there's a strong connection between the mystery of time and the mystery of awareness. So just tuck that in your mind for a moment. Let's look at some more expressions that involve time, so we can maybe examine more of our underlying assumptions, what they are as we say these phrases, how our unconscious awareness of time will reveal itself. Let's start with this amazing expression that you've all heard. Time is money. Time is money. Time can be converted to consumer products, just like money. Time is a commodity, like oil or wheat. And this idea underlies a lot of our contemporary understandings about time. We're time consumers, we're time brokers. I love the phrase, the arrow of time. Time has direction, and it only goes one way, forward. It's a vector. So far, time does not go backwards, unless you've got a good science fiction novel and you have a time machine in your book, then you can go backwards. What would happen if one day science penetrates time enough to invent a time machine? Does that mean that time would no longer be an abstraction, that it would be more of a concrete reality like gravity? Not that we really understand that either. Recently, I was supposed to meet someone at a certain time, and my watch was wrong. And so I said to this friend, I lost track of time. So we refer to keeping track of time. Time has a track, and our mind has a track. And our mind tracks the time track, or train, the time train. So that's really interesting language too, isn't it? Because it tells us about this directionality. You often hear that time is the fourth dimension. So we have length, width, height, and time. Today in string theory, scientists work with 10 or 11 different dimensions, and like gravity and light and electromagnetism and time. A couple of minutes ago, I think I said, for time to go backwards, at this point in time, you need a science fiction novel. At this point in time is the phrase. And so now we've shifted a little bit at this point in time, and we're talking about a moment in time. So that's different from the track of time, the train of time. Time is made up of these moments strung together. And moments have different qualities. We have the phrase moment of truth. That's a nice expression, that truth is always present in the present moment, in the now. So we have this momentary present. You know, moments can be very powerful. We have these frozen moments, strong states in meditation sometimes, which I'm going to talk more about later. And sometimes you have a moment that stays with you forever, and you can look back 20 years later and see that moment so clearly, so precious, so deep and profound. And then we have the present moment. So where in time do we exist? In the present. And where is the present? And what is the present? Gil Fronsdale, one time he asked, is the present just the future rushing to become the past? I love that question. Is the present just the future rushing to become the past? And what is the past? The past is so important. We have all these memories. Jack Kornfield said that all pasts end up in the same place. He said, yesterday's conversation is completely gone. It's in the past. So is the Vietnam War. It's in the past. So are the Crusades. So is your personal history. So is your sixth grade teacher. Is your sixth grade teacher back there talking to the pharaohs in the same place? Yes, says Jack Kornfield. They're all in the same place. They're in the past together. I hope my sixth grade teacher is enjoying meeting the pharaohs, because she was quite wonderful. There's a memory. So does the past exist anywhere outside of our memory? Does time itself exist anywhere outside of our own mind? It's interesting to look a little bit at how different periods in history have looked at time. Most of the concepts that we take for granted really haven't been around that long. Let's just drop time for a minute and look at the concept of the self, of our individuality. The whole idea of individuality is not that old. It's a few hundred years old. Christianity, traditionally over centuries, just saw the self as this soul passing through the world, a soul in relationship to God. The self was not a unique force to be expressed in various ways, to express its individuality and opinions. And you know, the way we see the self today, the me, is feeds a lot into our delusion, myself. And similarly, time, the concepts we have of time are only a few hundred years old. How we relate to time is very different from how ancient civilizations related to time. They had reference to the seasons, to gets cold in the winter, gets warm in the summer. Farming, when do the seeds sprout? When do we harvest? That's time. When is the dawn? When is the dusk? Is it getting earlier every day or later? How does the weather change? Time, birth, death. They didn't have a clock. They had sundials, kind of a clock if the sun's out. They had hourglasses that you could turn upside down and measure an interval. Clocks were invented in the Netherlands around 1650. They made it possible. They changed a lot of things. One thing that they saw that's usually cited in history is navigation, because you need a clock to navigate the oceans properly. So once people had a clock on a boat, they could really know where they were. And that's why the discovery of by the Europeans of North America didn't happen until after the clock came. So I love this little story, which isn't really about Buddhism, but it's interesting, and I think you'll appreciate it. There were no clocks in 44 BC. But in Shakespeare's play, Julius Caesar, you can hear a clock striking the hour. And one of the players says, "The clock has stricken 3." So, when you study Shakespeare, they always point out this anachronism, this most famous anachronism. But apparently he enjoyed doing that because he would keep his audience on their toes. He did it on purpose and interested, just with a reference to time. So the clock was a product of the scientific revolution taking place in the 1600s. But there was another revolution taking place at the same time. And that's the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution has a great deal to do with how we see time today. In England, mill owners were building the very first factories. Before this, if you wanted something, you made it at home. You knitted it, you cut down a tree, you built it, you figured it out. But now, there are factories. We visited the kind of cradle of the Industrial Revolution in England, in Shropshire, where those first factories were built. And I was so impressed. The start of the Industrial Revolution was right here. But I hadn't thought about how it had affected us all these centuries later, because the mill owners hired many factory workers. And just like today, they owned the workers' time. You had to be there at 9 o'clock, and you weren't allowed to go home till 5 or later. You got lunch on schedule. And when you left, you were free to go home and probably just fall asleep and get up and do it again. So from that point on, everybody's time system was defined by the Industrial Revolution, the needs of the Industrial Revolution. And industry grew, it became worldwide. And today, around the world, most of us are living in this Industrial Revolution time. We have to be somewhere. Even after I retired, I had this, I have a schedule, and I have to be here, and I have to be here, and I have to be here. And if I can't, it's easy to get stressed. And I'm sure your lives are not that different. In the old days, societies would set aside sacred time. Christianity, no work on Sunday. My Jewish cousins became Orthodox, and when we went to their house, you couldn't even turn on a light switch on Saturday. Sacred time. And we don't really have sacred time in the same way anymore. In Buddhism, we have retreats, and that's a kind of sacred time, isn't it? And everything really changes when we step into that. But most people don't have sacred time anymore. They have fun time. They have weekends. So what happens when we lose sacred time? I love this song, "We're captives on the carousel of life." We have meetings, schedules, be here, be there, show up, Zoom meeting tomorrow at 10. John Travis always says that in Jamaica, they call this, your wristwatch, they call it an arm engine. So we're under this spell of Industrial Revolution time. It's quite remarkable. We have to manage our time. You can take a course in time management. Today, people even measure their worth by how much they make per hour. Let's look at a few more expressions. Let's make time to get together. So we have to make time, as if time could be made. I'm just killing time. What an expression, to kill time. As if empty time were the enemy and we were murdering it. Time on our hands. It's hard to picture. Time on my hands. I've got nothing to do. That's not a good place. Who knows where the time goes? Lost time. Real time. You guys are listening to me in real time. But if you're watching this on video next week, you're not in real time. I don't know what you're in. False time. Take some time out. A timeout can be a punishment for a kid, but for us, it's usually a good thing. It means stepping out of the whole rat race. There's a nice expression, rat race. You know, in other cultures, which were maybe less impacted by the Industrial Revolution, time, there's a different sense of time. Definitely in Mexico, if you're an hour late for an appointment, it doesn't matter, it's normal. In India, time's a little different. Other cultures do go slower. So let's move into just talking a little bit about how our practice affects our sense of time. Generally, it affects it very positively in a very healthy way. When we sit every day, it lubricates this sense of time. We seem to have more time. We have a calmer attitude towards time. You know, one way to think of the practice is that it changes us from being a person who causes suffering for myself and others to becoming a person who doesn't cause so much suffering for myself and others. The Buddha said, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. So that's a really great way to think of this practice. We cause less suffering if we practice. And one of the ways that we cause less suffering is because our sense of time changes through the practice. As we become more open and sensitive and aware. You know, in Buddhist psychology, we're aware of the difference somewhat between mind time and body time. One of my guidings tonight, I was talking a little bit about the body going slower and being a more stable base. And the breath goes even slower, which is why the breath is such a great object of concentration. So body time seems more harmonious than mind time because the mind is so fast that it can just slip away on its own track. We talked about momentary time, those special moments that happen, the present moment. But there's also the idea of serial time. Serial time includes a span over many moments. The now is a moving moment in time. So let's talk a little bit about timelessness, this transcendence through the practice. You know, when we're on the track or the train of time, this linear time, we are kind of caught, but time can be vertical. There can be a depth of time. There can be a moment that appears to us in incredible detail and this great depth, and comes with that a certain peace and transcendence and feeling of apprehending reality in a more real way. And in Buddhism, we call that the timeless. The train stops and we're allowed to go deep, vertically deep into the moment and experience this magnificence. And this is the timeless. there's a potential for the timeless in every single moment. Every moment is filled with possibility. If we allow ourselves to be open to this, we can live more in the depth of time. And as our practice matures, we have more and more experience of that. But when we're rushing around, it's very hard to apprehend this depth of time. You know, being in the now, it has no boundaries. If you do any art form, you know about this. It's like music, or it's like painting. You move into this timelessness because you're present to the depth of what you're doing. So, and when you do that, you can speak across time. We can listen to what Beethoven had to say to us. We can look at what Monet had to say to us. And so when you apprehend the timeless and communicate it in some way, in an art form, you defy time. When we're in a linear mode with time, we need to know the quantity. How much time do we have? How can we get more time? But we lose touch with the quality of time. In mindfulness practice, the quality of time is everything. It's in our minds, it's in our hearts. Buddhism talks about the timeless. But you know, there's a word that we don't use that I just want to point out. We don't talk about the eternal in Buddhism, and many other religions do. And the reason we don't is because being eternal implies a couple of things. First of all, it implies that something exists. And Buddhism's not so sure about anything existing. But even more obvious to grasp, eternal implies permanence. And in Buddhism, everything is in flux and nothing is permanent. So we don't use that word eternal, interestingly enough. And when you hear it in another religion, you'll maybe recognize now a different take on things from using this word timeless rather than the word eternal. So timelessness and awareness are very close. Awareness is never judging. It's always peaceful. Awareness has no opinions on what is happening. Awareness is simply connected to the timelessness of now. Being in the flow, being fully with the changes and the flux as it happens, and then time stands still. If you're timeless, you don't fear death. A synonym in Buddhism for the timeless is the deathless. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences and anything you want to share about all this. I can't see most of you, so if you just unmute yourself and speak. Marcia, do you want to go back to the other view? I guess I can set my computer.
All you have to do, Mary Helen, is put it
Got
on
it. I got it.
gallery.
Thank you. I forgot you weren't in control of that.
Mary Helen?
Jen, I can see who's raising their hand now.
Great. I just was remembering listening to a Talking Heads song in the last couple days, and David Byrne is singing, "Time Isn't After Us." And I just was really struck by what you're talking about. And I remembered being struck by those lyrics. I think a lot of times I have a kind of antagonistic relationship with this thing called time. And the other thing that I was thinking about is I wrote down your first comment, time is an abstraction. But I'm living with my two kids who are 21 and 23 and watching them get older and taller and more hilarious. there's nothing abstract about that, at
Great
all.
point.
Yeah, so this has just been really, I appreciate this topic a lot. I appreciate your multifaceted approach. And I guess I just wanted to throw out a couple more nodes of observation.
Yeah, just when we see the changes that happen through time, it is not abstract. You're so right about that.
Hi, Mary Helen.
Yeah. Is that Tim?
Uh-huh.
Hi, Tim.
Yeah, appreciate the topic. And as you were kind of listing some of those phrases, I was writing some down that came to my head. And then one of them was quality time, which is, you kind of said quality of time, but like when I think about what's most important to me in my life, that's at the top of my list is quality time. And kind of what that means to me is those times when I am fully present with my experience, with people that I am close to, or in nature, or doing some kind of activity that I really enjoy, and just being really present with that and enjoying it fully. That is kind of my definition of quality time. And anyway, like I said, it's kind of at the top of my list of what I want out of life. And the other thing that just came to me, and you touched on a little bit, maybe how did we come up with the sense of time? And, I think it kind of maybe goes back to the difference between day and night, and then like dividing up the day. At some point, people had to be organized to work together to do things. And there was like the concept of the morning and the afternoon and the evening. And then these divisions kept getting smaller and smaller until we're down to like the second and the nanosecond. And, it's definitely lost something the smaller those divisions have gotten. It just seems like it's become such a controlling force in our lives. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I love one of the things that you said. You pointed out something really positive about our, time schedules, which is that people wanted to get together to make things happen as a group. I'm not sure exactly what you said, but something like that. And that's a really positive side that, yes, we can get together at 10 o'clock and make some decisions and do some work together and go on a picket line or whatever we're going to do to make happen what we want to see happen. So that's a really positive aspect that I hadn't thought of. Thank you. Time's not just the enemy. It's also so useful, isn't it?
A couple other phrases I thought of were good times, me time, time is on my side.
Great. Good ones. Yeah, time is on my side. That's another song. We got numbers. We got 4 or 5 songs going tonight.
Mary Helen, I have a comment to make about time.
I see it, please.
For a while, I lived up in the Arctic, and the Inuit people in their language, they don't have a word for future, like tomorrow. They don't put that into their language, and so it creates this kind of very spacious. I don't even know how they kind of function without that forward, but they all know, they just have a sense of what needs to happen. They don't make a plan like we do, but it still happens. Stuff still happens. They feed their people, they're very functional, but they just don't have, like, one of my friends was a school teacher in the system there, and she's from the lower 48, and she would talk about homework due tomorrow, and the kids were like, it didn't compute for them. So it's just a really interesting thing culturally speaking. I think different cultures have different relationships to time and how they frame it. So I just think that's a really interesting view, and how that works without certain frames around time. Because also up in the Arctic, winters are dark all 24 hours, and in the summer it's light 24 hours. So they're not on the same kind of daytime, nighttime thing as we are. So it's pretty fascinating, though, to see how that changes people's mindsets.
It is fascinating, and especially to not have a word for it, because when a language doesn't have a word for something, it's hard to have it exist in your mind. And I love that you brought in the day, the months of darkness, the months of light, because Tim was saying, time probably started because we have day and we have night, and we have day and we have night, but they don't. So really good points. Thank you.
I can say something. This is Mary. Hi.
Hi.
I really appreciate this talk because for so many years I've been working on, being present like many of us, I'm sure. But the time factor, the two people who I know who fell, just say, I'm not saying it happened to you, but we're in a rush, and that's why
I was
every
in a
time
rush.
around the house, I'm very careful, doesn't mean it won't happen to me. It still could, but it's really significant, and I'm really proud that you were you learned so much through that experience. Thanks for sharing, and I hope that you have healed up well. So, but I love the whole concept of this topic, and because it's just so important in our culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I definitely was in a big rush and completely responsible for what happened, and there was karma there. So but I'm really, I hope that I've really learned something from it. I resigned from a lot of things, and I have a lot less. Every day is different now from how it used to be. There's more time just to
Right. And I
relax.
still can't just read a book all day like some people can. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that, but I'm working on it. I go camping a lot, and when I camp, I have a lot of downtime, and I did a storytelling in the evening for a group because I was camping with a group. I kind of made this family camping outing every first week of August, and it was really neat to have a storytelling night, and so we could all be present with each other, and just really try and use quality time as well that you mentioned. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. That's great. And I am healing very well.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Just about all done. I have to finish a few more weeks of physical therapy, and I'm walking better and better, almost back to normal.
Great. That's good to hear.
Oh,
Blessings.
blessing. We have time for maybe one more person to share. If anybody has anything that's occurring to them, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'll speak. This is a very small thing, but excuse me, I think it's a result of the practice because I did not make any conscious decisions about it. But it used to be when I would go on vacation, I would, wherever I was, I'd be rushing around, trying to see as much as I possibly could, trying to take pictures. And I've noticed in the last year or two, I just really don't do that anymore. And like I say, I didn't make a conscious decision about it, but I see what I see. I can look at other people's pictures. Maybe I'll take one or two just to remind me, but there's a really different quality to how I am, particularly in a beautiful place. I don't have to try to capture it with my camera, which you can't really do anyway. So I didn't quite realize it till I looked kind of in retrospect and thought, oh, that's interesting. That just kind of developed by itself.
That's great, Cheryl. Thank you so much for sharing that. You reminded me of something. We went to the Grand Canyon, right? And about, I don't know, 100 feet from the edge is an IMAX theater. And so we went in there and people were taking pictures of the screen when the real Grand Canyon was right outside the door. I love that. I've always remembered that. And the whole idea of photos, I was sort of wondering, like, be here now? Yeah, it doesn't seem to fit quite, does it? So I agree with you. You guys, thank you. I'm gonna, we'll stop this subject now, and I'll do a brief metta, and then we'll turn things over to Jen, who has a few announcements for us. So let's go back into our we'll go into our loving kindness or metta meditation. So come back into your meditative posture that we started with, where your body is awake, alert, alive, and relaxed, and not worried about time. We're going to be deeply in this moment. Just be right here and let it be deep for us, and be really taking a deep breath. Let the body time take over, and take a deep breath into the heart. This heart in our bodies that is capable of the amazing humanity that we all have. That is our miracle, that we can be kind, that we can be friendly, that we can be compassionate when people are suffering, that we can be joyful, and that we can be at peace with things as they are. What beautiful qualities. And just feeling that beautiful capacity inside. And the energy of it, feeling the energy of it. Let that energy flow from your heart through your whole body like a golden light. And let's send that energy to ourselves. And let's wish for ourselves. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we be peaceful. May we be safe. Taking a breath into the heart. And now let's wish all for each other, for everyone who's here. May we all be happy. May we all be healthy. May we all be peaceful. May we all be safe. Taking another breath now, and let's let this energy flow out of our body and fill the room, and go outside the house and fill the street, the woods, wherever we are, and just spread and spread and spread magically over the land and the geography and the rivers and the mountains and the streams and the hills and the valleys, and moving out into larger and larger spaces covering the county and the state and the west of America and the country, or wherever you are, just covering and filling, and across continents and across oceans. We can take this feeling and wrap it around the planet, the beautiful planet. And let's send to all the beings on this planet, wherever they may be. May all beings everywhere be happy. May they be healthy. May they be peaceful. May they be safe. And let's wish together this great wish May all beings everywhere awaken and be free. Thank you, Marcia.
You can
Your
turn off
turn
the
to chat.
recording. The
I'll turn
recording,
off the recording. Thank you.
yeah.